Hello, everybody. Oliver G here from the Earful Tower podcast, where we dig deeper into the city of Paris, where I'm your eyes and ears in Paris. These are kind of taglines that I put together after reading some of the really lovely comments on my social media posts this week, announcing that I've been living in Paris for 10 years exactly. And then lots of you guys put really nice messages, and it kind of got me thinking, what is it that I do, and how can I put an accurate tagline? But it also got me thinking about, after 10 years in Paris, what have I learned? So this episode is going to be me telling 10 things that I've learned after 10 years in Paris. Given when you learn things, when you go on a bit of a journey like this, it means you're usually overcoming obstacles. So a fair warning, I think, that some of these aren't, they're not all 10 positive things. They're not all like, if you go to the supermarket at 7 p.m. you get cheaper croissants or something. It's not like that. These are obstacles that I've overcome. So it's a bit of, I don't want it to sound like I'm complaining. I certainly don't want it to sound like I'm bashing on this city or this country that I love so much. It's just, these are 10 things that I've learned. At the end of the episode, you'll hear from one of the founders of My Private Paris, who are sponsoring this whole season of the Earful Tower. And speaking of learning things, I had no idea, if you play French Monopoly, I had no idea which is the most expensive street. And so you're going to hear at the end a little chat about the most expensive street in Paris according to Monopoly and what you can find there. More on that at the end of My Private Paris tour company in this city and beyond. But first, let's hear from myself, Oliver G, telling you 10 things I've learned from 10 years in Paris. Let's do it. Okay, so each of these 10 things, I've written 10 sort of little headlines, which will make it easier for us to share the list on Substack and on the website and on social media. But I'll explain them all as we go along. And number one is direct equals respect. And what I mean by that is, I've said it on the show before, in my early years in Paris, a way that I found of getting the most out of my interactions with Parisian people was to be overly friendly. And that's certainly not something that happens in Paris. People aren't overly friendly to each other. But that was kind of my hack, is I'd go up, when I'm ordering something in a restaurant, is I'd say, ça va, bonjour. I'd chat with the waiter or the waitress. And it kind of threw them off guard a little bit. And it let things go on my level, whether that's the, level of French or just where I want to have a pleasant chat. But over the years, as I've learned the language better and learned the city better, I've learned that in these kind of interactions, especially restaurants or whatever, or when you're asking for something, being direct will get you more respect and will get you what you need. So when I have lunch with French friends, they're often so quickly to the point with a waiter. It's not like, sometimes they don't even make eye contact. And it's, same with if you have a, plumber coming over. If you're being all polite and friendly and joking, there can be a good chance that you don't get what you need. And I've learned this lesson, but it doesn't mean I abide by it all the time. And I've certainly suffered, even recently, with being too friendly. And someone even emailed me about this recently, because some other guest had said it on this show once. And they said it doesn't sound very nice. It doesn't sound like a nice world if people are being so blunt and direct with each other. But it's just how it is. If you're direct, you get respect. I'm not saying do it all the time, but it definitely makes a difference. So number 2, taxi rides make good lessons. And specifically I'm talking about French lessons. So if you have this, and this goes, a lot of these I've tried to make it relevant for everybody, not just for people who've been here for 10 years. This is relevant for visitors, relevant for long-time residents, maybe even sometimes for French people. But in this case, if you take a taxi for 10 minutes or for an hour out to the airport, typically cab drivers want to talk. Typically they speak French and maybe not English. And typically you've got a hostage who you can practice your French with. And, you're in this position where it's just one-on-one. You can really focus. You can really, sort of keep your finger on the pulse of what people in Paris are thinking, and most importantly, you can practice your French. So if you're like me and you don't like doing French lessons, it's a really good way of having a chat with someone you wouldn't usually have a chat with, one-on-one at great depth, and about whatever you want to talk about. So taxi rides make good lessons. If it's in your budget to take a taxi or an Uber somewhere in Paris, why not make the most of it? I know, conversely, I know that there are some people who come to Paris on the first, second, third time and they want to practice their French with a waiter on a busy Café Terrace in the Marais. And kind of back to my first point, it's not going to get you any respect. That waiter's got a lot of things to do. And if you're there going, whoa, il y a 5 personnes de ma famille, they don't care. But a taxi driver might just care. So taxi rides make for good lessons. The next one, number 3, I've written paper is still king, and then in brackets, and many things are unnecessarily complicated. Now, I think, once again, on this list, it's only relevant to me and my experiences. So I grew up in Australia, and then I lived 4 or 5 years in Sweden, and then I moved to Paris. And comparing Paris to especially Sweden, when it comes to things like user-friendly websites, or applying for opening a bank account, or putting your child in school or whatever, I can only say the French paperwork is just such a headache and sometimes so unnecessary. And what I said something like this recently on social media, and someone responded, "Are you kidding? Paper's dead in Paris. What are you talking about? I bought a house without ever touching a piece of paper." And yeah, of course, I'm sure there are exceptions. But when a child is born in Paris, and I've had 2 of them now, the first thing you get from the town hall is not a birth certificate, but several. I think it's 7. It could be 7. If it's not 7, it's 9. You get 7 or 9 birth certificates. And just that, I remember saying the first time, I was like, why so many? And they said, well, you're going to need one to give to the crèche, like the preschool. You're going to need one when you first go to the doctors. You're going to need one when you apply for health insurance. You're going to need one. And I said, well, what happens when I've used up all 7? They go, well, you come in. They probably said, you write us a letter and you get another 7. And in my mind, where in Sweden, it's just a number on a computer, you don't need anything like that. Everything is so simple. And then it's the same with, speaking of having children, when my son started school, the amount of paperwork. So when there's a excursion to go to the cinema or something like that, which is really sweet, I love it, it's great, they send home a letter with all the children that you have to sign to say, yes, I'm okay with it. And even yes, I'm okay that there might be photos taken. And yes, I'm okay that these photos will go on the school blog, these kind of things. And every time, and it's not just for the outings, it's for everything. And every time I just think, couldn't we just sign something at the beginning saying, I'm up for all the excursions? Or, same thing. This is just one example. Same with when I opened a bank. They made me sign something that said, if you want internet banking, you need to sign this too. And if you want to have a plastic card, you need to sign this too. I was like, can't you just sign for everything at the end? Same with when I'm going on a rant here, but when you move into a new house, you have to do it's called the état de lieu. And you go through every single item, every single wall, every single hook on the wall, everything. And you say if it's in good condition or average condition or bad condition, and then you got to sign against everything. And I remember on would have been my first day in France, I remember saying to the landlord, can't we just say the things that are in bad condition and just assume everything else is good? She said, no, that's not how it works. And you have to sign the bottom of every page and write lu et approuvé, which means read and approved. So those things I find tough, and the unnecessarily complicated, just typically lots of paperwork where I feel like one sort of nod could almost do the trick. Now, onto a more positive one. I've put here, believe in your French. And I think this is relevant for everybody who's learning French. And the idea is, I think probably for a bit of context, I think I probably speak, 8.5 out of 10, 9 out of 10 French? Maybe more, for a foreigner here. I speak good enough French to do anything. but certainly not. I would never fool a French person into thinking that I'm French. Someone said they thought I was Canadian the other day, which I thought was probably pretty close. But the point is, it's so easy to doubt yourself, even if you've just begun learning French, and you want to go and order a Coca-Cola, check if something is about to close or whatever. You can doubt yourself, and that doesn't really go away. Even I think I'm quite confident with speaking French, but still I'll have my doubts. And I remember like some specific examples. I have an Australian friend. He speaks worse French than me, and when he put his child into creche, I was like, how do you do it? How are you talking to the teachers? Like, this sounds really complicated to me. And he's like, you kidding? It's just did she sleep? Did she eat? Okay, great, have a good day, bye-bye. And obviously I found that's entirely true, and it's the same for other things too. It's the same for, goodness, going to the hospital when my wife Lena had a baby. That was one of the big ones. We're like, can we do this? How do you have a baby in French? This, it sort of worried us at first, but it ended up being totally fine. And same with when I moved here, I was a journalist. I was interviewing people in French about sometimes really horrific things like terror attacks and this kind of thing. And the point is, it always worked. And whether that's because people are kind, whether it's because French people admire and appreciate when you make an effort, or whether it's just because the world has to function even if you speak like an Australian cow, which is exactly what I think I probably do. The point is, if you believe in your French, you can do it. Another example is a French podcast, and they reached out to me and said, I want to interview you about the Earful Tower and what you've done. It will be like 45 minutes long. And my go-to reaction, I said, no thanks, I don't think anyone wants to hear me speak for 45 minutes. And then she really convinced me, and it was totally fine. So same with if you're just coming here and you're doubting yourself a little bit, believe in your French. You'll be surprised how good you actually are. Now, that takes us to number 5. Speaking about the Earful Tower as a company, I've written here, growing a company, growing a company is tough. And I think I don't typically get into what it's like having a French company, because I think it's sort of irrelevant and maybe boring for people at home. But the sort of short version of it is, if you start a hobby like I did, a podcast, it's really easy to start a hobby, and then it starts making some money, hopefully, if it's going well, and that's all really easy. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to make that work in terms of paying taxes and all this kind of stuff. But when you get to a certain level, and this level changes all the time, so I don't even know what it is now, but when you sort of earn more money than a small hobby company, and for us it happened when we started making books, because with the Kickstarters, which were certainly... Hang on, let me say that again. With the Kickstarters, which typically have done really well, you get a big injection of cash into your hobby, and then even if you spend all that cash to make the books, there's a lot of turnover going on, and the government says, well, you've got to make it a company now, and that's fine, that's cool. And the Earful Tower's been a company for maybe 4 years now, I think. But building that company, growing it, is really tough, especially when you're at the small level like I am, like McDonald's or whatever. It's a whole different conversation. But when you just go from hobby to company, especially things like hiring people, the way that the rules work here with hiring people, and I'm sure some of the listeners out there have heard of things like URSAF, which is the sort of the bane of all the small companies in Paris and France, like especially cafes and restaurants, which is just the taxes that you have to pay. It's really hard. And I've always wanted to hire people, but you kind of, without getting too deep into it, but like, it's more than just paying the salaries. It's like sometimes it's paying an awful lot more of the salary to the tax man as well. And then if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, it can be really hard to part ways with someone that's working with you for you, you know. So it makes me anyway, and I know a lot of other small business owners that I talk to. It makes you hesitant to grow the company, because it's hard to make it work, you know, and it's very expensive. So not just that side of things though, hiring people. I mean, things like getting invoices paid. Another thing I don't talk about because I think maybe it sounds ungrateful or maybe it's boring, but like some of the biggest, most, I'm not naming names here, but some of the biggest, most famous shops and museums in the world, which happen to be in Paris, are certainly the worst at paying invoices for things like books. And you wouldn't believe it if I explained how much work can go, how much time can go into getting these people to pay for books that have already sold, you know? And these things that just drag on, and I want to be creating and doing these kind of things. Just it's tough. So that's something that I've learned is you sort of got to go in knowing that it's tough and trying to make your way through it. But talk about a learning curve. That's been one of them. Now the next one, number 6. Before I say the next one, though, I'm just going to have a quick pause to say a thank you to lots of the people who jumped on as new Patreon members after I said last week that I'm going to be focusing more on membership this year, 2025. Thanks to everybody who's joined, and I hope you enjoyed some of the things that I've posted, including my wife Lena's started a new column, and the first one of it is her ripping to shreds a popular new cafe. It's not really their fault. It just got too viral, I think. I won't say what the cafe is, but here's a quote from what she wrote. She said, "Let's be honest. The moment you step inside, you'll quickly realize this is not the Zen prison cafe experience you're hoping for. Staff turning people away, etc., etc. And there are a few enthusiastic coffee customers who are armed with pro-looking cameras, determined to get the right shot. And I even got a pro-feeling camera bag donked on my head at one point. I was with her at the cafe. It was exactly as she said. Thanks, but no thanks." That's the latest review on Patreon. New episode as well, podcast episode coming out in the coming days. Patreon.com/the Earful Tower, or you can be a member on Substack. Now, on to number 6. And this is something I have a feeling a lot of people will relate to. It's hard to make French friends. I think, fortunately, I've got a strong handful of French friends, but when I sit back and think about them, almost all of them have a very strong connection to being an immigrant / expat / foreigner in another country. And whether that just means that they're used to this kind of world that I live in too, or that means that they speak better English, or I don't know what it means. But even the French friends I have are sort of international French friends. And I've heard people who've really sort of dug into this deeper, saying that Parisians especially have their sort of clique, the people that they've been at school with since the age of 4. And I get that, totally get it. And this isn't my way of saying I wish I was in those cliques. It's just more an observation that I made. Also with people like me coming in their 30s or 20s, I came to Paris. I can assume a lot of people probably thought I'd leave straight away. I've seen a number of people come and go, and I get that it's you might feel like you're wasting your time hitching your wagon to someone who might be gone in 2 years. So that's probably why a lot of these foreigners in Paris, like myself, hang out together. But also, it's our fault too. But it's hard to make French friends, and I think I imagine it's easier outside of the capital, but in Paris it can be quite hard. Next one here, a story, I think people have written books about this, but no can mean convince me. Specifically in things like admin or trying to get permission to do something. I'm not talking about anything else where no absolutely means no, but if you I can think of so many examples of where they just straight away have said, oh, it's not possible. For example, when my wife used to make shoes and we had to deliver them to Printemps, the famous department store. And it was such a big moment. We were so excited to bring them. And they had to be there on a certain day. And when we delivered them, they were like, oh, you absolutely can't deliver them here. It has to be done this certain way with a certain permission. And then because it was important to us, we didn't just go, oh, yeah. We sort of were like, what can we do? How can we make this work? And it ended up they just go, yeah, go up there. And I think it was me and my father-in-law went up to the top floor of Printemps by ourselves. There was no security anywhere. There were no customers anywhere. And we'll just walk around being like, where do we even leave these shoes? And it was kind of stunning. It was a really unusual experience, but that kind of thing I can think of having experienced it so many times, where you ask for permission to do something and the first response is no, but in reality it means convince me. Probably not my way of suggesting you get into printemps, but if you're walking around and you want to see behind some kind of door and there's a security guard standing there, just because they automatically say no doesn't necessarily mean no. I can think of when I do my Marais walking tour, sometimes I tell the story of the library. And maybe these people will be listening now, but there were some people who really wanted to see the other side of this library where there was a painting that I sometimes go into on the walk. And I asked the staff members and they said, absolutely not. You can't go in there unless you become a member. And I said, we just want to go and look at it for 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds to look at this picture. No, absolutely not. And then she said, do you really want it on your conscience that I make you members of this library just so you can see a picture for 30 seconds? And I looked to the people who were on the walk with me, and they were like, yeah, we really want to see it. So I said to the librarian, I'm afraid we do, yes. And then she just looked at it, she's like, all right, just go and see it quickly. So I can understand this might sound like I'm suggesting you be annoying or persistent, but it's kind of the way things get done around here. And if you manage to convince people, you can make a big difference. I'll tell you another example. We had these guys, these roofers, who were up on our there were young girls, maybe they were fixing something on our rooftop, and we live on the top floor, so I could see them walking around. And when they came down the ladder, they were getting gear or whatever. I said, hey, could I come up? Because I really want to wash the skylights. Just 20 seconds. They said, absolutely not. And that was a safety thing. I get it. And I said, is there any way of getting it done? No way. I said, would you do it if I gave you some cash? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And I paid him a little cash, and he cleaned all the windows, and we had a good old laugh and a good old chat about it. But the point is, he started off saying no, and it ended up with clean windows. So no can mean convince me. Here's an intriguing one, number 8 now. The arrondissements, so the 20 districts of Paris, the arrondissements, are unique kingdoms. Now, firstly, I use the word kingdom because when my brother came over here to Paris, he loved that the districts all had different numbers and he called them kingdoms. So he'd be like, oh, we're in the 8th kingdom, I love it. And I thought that was always kind of nice. But the point here is they're whole different universes sometimes. And I think at a glance, a tourist could tell the same thing, that the 16th is very different from the 11th, for example. But what I mean is on a deeper level. Now, I've been here for 10 years, right? And I spent 2 years in 5 different districts. So the 2nd, the 11th, the 18th, the 7th, and the 12th. And only from living there and experiencing daily life, I really got an idea of how different they are. And a very tangible example is when I lived in the 7th arrondissement, which is kind of old money and older people, or, elderly people. When we were there, we brought the average age in our building down by about 40 years. And then to make matters even more interesting, we had a son when we were living there. And when we walked around that district with a pram and an infant child, so many people would come and say lovely things. Sometimes it's not lovely things, that unsolicited advice was pretty common as well. Like things like, oh, shouldn't he be wearing shoes? Those kind of things, even though he's in the pram. But mostly people would just come up and say, oh, what a lovely baby. And my reaction to that was, Parisians love babies, or maybe French people love babies. It wasn't necessarily that the baby was a cute baby. I think it was just like babies bring out people's like goo goo gaga happiness. And I would have sworn that was the case all over the whole country, really. And then when we moved to the 12th and we had a daughter, I can tell you that no one gives a hoot. Firstly, no one even gives a hoot if they see a pram going past. And the reason is because in the 12th, it's almost all families that live here. There's parks everywhere, there's children running everywhere, there's so much space here. And I could count on one hand, because it could be 0, the number of times an elderly person has come up and looked inside the pram and said, oh wow, there's a baby in there. Whereas in the 7th arrondissement, it happened all the time. I mean, multiple times a day. And the point of it is, it's not just about babies, it's about so many different things. But the districts are these whole entities into themselves, or unto themselves, and kingdoms is a good word for it. And it takes probably years to figure it out. I'm not saying I figured it out at all, but the ones that I've been in, I've noticed these dramatic changes. Could be a whole episode there, but we'll keep it at that. The arrondissements are unique kingdoms. So 2 more. Number 9. People are happy to bend the rules. That kind of goes a bit back to that story I said about Printemps. But more in general, it feels to me that there's a kind of Parisian thing where it's kind of us against the man, and us is most of us, and the man is, I don't know, the big boss or the government or whatever, and people are quite happy to wink wink, nudge nudge, let you through, give you a discount, give you something free, and it's nice. I think it's kind of nice, and I can mean that on a really small level, like a baker giving an extra chouquette for a child, or when we first came to Paris, my wife and I, when we were young and in love, we're still in love. We're just not young or as young anymore. But I remember like we'd go into like a sort of whirlwind romance, busting into a restaurant or a cafe or whatever, and people would just be like, "Here's an extra drink. Here's an extra shot," or whatever. People were so friendly like that, and that sort of bending the rules a little bit. Just I don't know, because there's a sort of happy mood in the air, and I always think it's so nice when these little things like a free chouquette or getting access to somewhere or whatever, you know, in my own job where I'm always trying to get access to these buildings to take pictures and so on, when these little rules are bent, it's the word conspiring is probably wrong, but the way that you feel that you're at one with your fellow person in Paris can be really nice. I really like that. So there's a positive one, and number 10 is quite positive too. Number 10 things that I've learned from 10 years in Paris is that there are still marvels to find in Paris. Now picture this, I've been living here for 10 years. First 2 years was as a journalist telling the news of the city or the country, and then the next 8 years as a podcaster where my specialty has been sort of digging deeper and finding things, you know. I think hopefully you noticed by now that my vibe isn't here's how you buy a metro ticket or, you know, here's the definitive guide for going up the Eiffel Tower. It's a bit deeper than that. That's the goal. There's some people who do that kind of stuff really well, but for me it's a bit more finding the cool stuff, the marvels. And imagine after 10 years of doing all that, this past week, in fact on the 10th anniversary of my time in Paris, I went to the left bank, 5th arrondissement specifically, and I think I mentioned it on last week's episode even. There's a sort of, I don't know what the word would be, an abbey, perhaps. It's called the Collège des Bernardins, I think. And it's this beautiful, imagine these vaulted ceilings, arches inside, like that are, I don't know if whitewashed is the right word, but like blonde stones is what they call them in Notre Dame. It's like that kind of vibe. And it's pristinely preserved. Top of my head, I don't know how old it is. It's a nave. That's the word that the lady said to me. And we went in there because I'd heard, it was on a street that I've walked down, but I never had seen this thing before. And I went in there and I'd heard there was a cafe. And we went into this, firstly, walked through the front door and I was gobsmacked. Totally gobsmacked at how beautiful it was. And then I'd heard there was this cafe in the corner and it was there. And I went and sat down and... got to be honest, not an impressive coffee, not an impressive hot chocolate, but the building itself was so stunning, and I just kept thinking to myself, how have I never been in here before? When I'm always trying to find these kind of things, you know, not abbeys, but just in general, find things that people don't typically talk about. And the moral of it is that this city just has so much to give, so much to give. I was thinking about this today, like, I live about 15 minutes walk from the Picasso Museum. The Picasso Museum. I can go and see that for probably $10 and 15-minute walk I can go and see 5,000 works of Picasso. There's just surprises on every corner, and they just keep giving. So even after 8 years, I don't feel like I'm anywhere near done with these things, and I love the idea that there are still marvels to be found. Now, that's the end of my list. In writing that list, it occurred to me that I could do a couple more similar top 10 things, like the top 10 milestones of the Earful Tower or of my life here. Things like getting married, having children, and the stories that come with them. Based on how this episode performs, maybe I'll dive into those things as well. But if you like what you hear, comment, send me a message, let me know, and I can happily do more. Otherwise, thank you so much for being around, for your support, and for listening to the show and for telling your friends. I'm loving doing it still. But the last word this week, as with this whole season, will go to My Private Paris. You can find them at myprivateparis.com or linked in the show notes below, where they're talking about the street that's the most expensive in Monopoly. Do you know what it is? Hang around to find out.
Marie Segura from My Private Paris. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastically well, but curious. I'm curious to know what the Mayfair of Paris is.
Oh, you want to know the most expensive street of Paris?
Please, on the Monopoly board. Go on, what is it?
Yeah, so it's Rue de la Paix. A lot of people, they know Champs-Élysées, Avenue Montaigne, but they don't really know about Rue de la Paix.
I would have guessed Champs-Élysées, actually.
Yeah, but that's the second one.
So Peace Street.
The Peace Street, but the name, it's not related at all with with what's going on in Rue de la Paix. So it's actually where the haute couture, the high, the toppest of the fashion started, and from there, we have now, you know how we have Parc Hayat and Ritz and Le Meurice, and they're all located by Place Vendôme.
Yep.
Right. So that's where really fashion started. And during the Second Empire, that's when Cartier and Vuitton and Hermès, they all made, their brand famous thanks to the Empress Eugénie.
Okay, and but that stuff's all on Place Vendôme, not on Rue de la Paix.
Actually, Rue de la Paix is this tiny section that is between Place Vendôme and Opéra Garnier.
Okay, so going from the north up away from the Tuileries Gardens.
Yeah, it's not very long street, but it's
the most expensive street. I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, you have Tiffany's, you have Rolex, you have all the great
I guess
best.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's become like a sort of hub for fashion today as well.
Completely. Yeah.
For the people with the right personality, if you
And you have, of course, Coco Chanel. She lived there. You know how she lived in the Ritz for so long. And her very first boutique was also just right by this Place Vendôme on Rue Cambon. And you can visit, still today, you can visit the original boutique of Coco Chanel.
There you go. Do you know what the second most expensive one is on Monopoly?
That's the Champs-Élysées.
Is it? Oh, so it was second.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to have some Monopoly game, you and I.
Yeah.
And your whole team.
The Parisian version.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of tours, do you do stuff around there as well?
Yes, we do either something related completely to with Chanel or Dior history, or we do fashion history also, which is very interesting because you start from Marie Antoinette with her puffy dresses and the wigs and all the flowers, and you get to what is going on today, like on the fashion weeks and so on.
Something we can talk about next time. Also, I want to talk to you sometime about French literature.
Yeah.
Because I understand you're an expert. So I'm going to tuck that one away for next time. But Marie Segura from My Private Paris, they can do any kind of tours. You can almost ask them to do a bespoke thing. I think that's what you guys...
Yes, exactly. We custom and tailor-made everything.
So go.
Ask us and we can make your dream come true.
There you go. The link will be in the show note below. That's My Private Paris. Thank you very much, Marie. And thank you, everybody, for listening.